Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis, joined by our producer, Mike Urostowski. And we're here to talk about Northern College football. And this is a Michigan show. Now, it does not mean it is only a show for Michigan fans. Because, Bill, I think what Michigan is, what Michigan did last year, the controversy about Michigan, the success around Michigan, the changes around Michigan remain the number one thing in Northern College football. And we are going to address all of that head on this show. We're going to have Stephen Godfrey of Split Zone Duo on at the back half of this show, coming in at 1 p.m. Eastern, to talk about Michigan and Texas as blue bloods, what they've been, how much money they spend, what they mean to college football, what Steve Sarkisian and Sharon Moore are doing as coaches there. That's at the end of the show. The middle of the show, Bill and I will do our big game breakdown on Michigan, Texas, noon Saturday, the Big House. We normally do the big game breakdown on Thursday. We're going to do a couple other games on Thursday because week 2 is a banger in the North. But we wanted to make sure we gave proper respect to this huge Michigan-Texas game. And we're going to start, Bill, with the idea of, are we anti-Michigan? But the reason that I think this is worth doing is twofold. One is that you and I have been covering Ohio State football for a long time, and I understand why that perception may be there, that we are anti-Michigan, and there may be a reality there, because just like the lens that we have been viewing college football through for the last decade, for me 2 decades, has been through an Ohio State lens. I don't think it means that you are an Ohio State fan, that you root for Ohio State, but it's the lens in which you view everything else. But the second part of it, Bill, is what I said at the top, which is Michigan is so vital to what Northern College football is. I think we need to state for the record where we are, what we think. And I think everybody in the North has to sort of grapple with their thoughts about Michigan, because it's sort of hard to be agnostic on Michigan right now, right? They are so prominent with everything going on with the sport. I think almost everybody has a Michigan opinion, don't they?
I think most do, and I have found myself a bit conflicted on Michigan. I think a lot of people have. For some, they're not. I think for anybody who loves Michigan, you're not terribly conflicted, and for somebody who hates Michigan, you're not terribly conflicted. If you have no opinion, hate, or love on the matter, then I think you do find yourself a bit conflicted, which is kind of where I am. But they are, I think there's no doubt about it that Michigan probably has become maybe the most polarizing program in college football, depending on how you view the Connor Stallion stuff. It also makes them, or maybe arguably, the most interesting program in college football. And they're in like a little bit of a transition period where you're not entirely sure which way it's going to go. So it's all a bit fascinating, but also for me, I think at times a little hard to wrap my mind around.
Yeah, and the one thing that I hope for and I believe is that Michigan is not going to go away. I don't think this is the end of Michigan as a prominent part of the national college football conversation just because Jim Harbaugh left. And I hope it is not the case, because this is so much better for everyone, especially Michigan fans, but for the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, for the Big Ten, for the top half of the country, for trying to have the North fight the South. It's hard when Michigan is on the sideline in that fight. And when Michigan is right in the middle of that fight, Landis, can't you feel the landscape, at least of Northern college football, and to certainly some degree, all of college football, the landscape shifts when Michigan matters?
Yeah, absolutely it does. That's why Michigan, like, sort of not mattering for as long as it did, I don't know, it just felt like there was a little bit of a void there. It felt like at times, not that Ohio State, I think, or Michigan ever viewed themselves as brothers in arms. They probably never do. But there was a long stretch of time there where it felt like Ohio State was sort of like on its own, trying to be relevant outside of the SEC, right? And now there are more programs besides Michigan helping them, but I think Michigan probably needs to be a part of that to combat that Southern driven sort of narrative that dominates college football. So I agree with you that it is better for the sport for Michigan to be a part of that than not. It's a little, I guess there's some questions about like what Michigan's place in that conversation, how much of it is real and how much of it isn't real. And then what will it be moving forward, right? So that's the interesting part of it.
So I have a dream about Northern college football and all of us up here being brothers in arms.
Mm.
And one of those things where, yeah, you have a rivalry with your brother or your sister or your neighbor or the high school down the street from your high school, right? That we understand that's how the best rivalries work, that there's a commonality there. And you dislike each other because actually you're kind of similar because you have a similar history or you have a similar geography or similar culture. My dream, and this is not this show, this is a separate show, is a world where we can put aside at times our northern differences and together tell the South to cram it.
Mhm.
I don't know if we can ever get there with Ohio State, Michigan. I don't know if we can get there with Iowa, Iowa State, or Oregon, Washington, or Rutgers, Maryland. I'm not gonna, but like, like you hate, right? You hate what you know. Well, we're not. Can we ever get Ohio State, Michigan fans to be like, okay, yeah, I do not like you, but let's go beat Georgia? Like, can we? Do you think that'll ever happen, or am I in a fantasy land?
You are in a fantasy land. That will never happen, especially now. That will never happen.
I know, but I just hate this. Hate this. Why can't look at this? Look at this. How hateable is this right now? Look at me. This is insane. We can't get people in Michigan and Ohio to unite around disliking the dogs. I know. That's not the point of this. The point of this is for you and I to put our cards on the table.
Okay.
And here's the thing. I think we already have some disagreement here. Right off the bat in our YouTube chat, we had Carter chime in and say, because the question is, are Doug and Bill anti-Michigan? Carter says, on the contrary, Doug and Bill are very much too nice to Michigan. Doug has basically said he's fine with them not being punished because their reputation took a hit. Like that matters at all. I should rephrase that. Doug has repeatedly said he doesn't care what the punishments will be, and he thinks Ohio State fans shouldn't either, which is insane to think, let alone say to an audience. So this is somebody who thinks, and I certainly got pushback there. I probably did not, I don't know if pushback. I should fight with Dan Wetzel more. He's our guest, but I should fight with him more. When we had him on the first time to talk about the Connor Stallions thing, he and I did not agree exactly on Connor Stallions' impact on Michigan's success. I've stated it in the past. I probably, and I will in the future, push back more there. So I get that. But that's Carter saying we're too nice to Michigan. This is Lori, the comment right under Carter. To me, they are a bit biased against Michigan. I thought they made a fair assessment in the national championship game episode, but after that episode, they do make comments here and there that are biased. And if they were said on Kings of Columbus, they would not be surprising. So we also have a local show we do once a week called Kings of Columbus. We do Kings of the North 5 times a week. I think, Bill, it is impossible to sort of talk about Michigan without making somebody mad. Do you think like that? Which is why it's an interesting topic. I don't want this to be a hot take. Let's get people fired up without being genuine. Like, that's not the point of this. But this is real. Mm-hmm. And I do think people, I don't know, we're not here to change. Can you change people's minds about Michigan and the Connor Stallion situation? And we do have a final verdict coming from the NCAA at some point. Do you think there are minds to be changed? And I don't mean in the Michigan fan base or the Ohio State fan base, because those opinions are set. We understand that. But for general college football fans, for neutral college football fans, do you think there are minds to be changed there? Do you think everyone kind of thinks like, yeah, they cheated. No, they didn't cheat. It didn't matter. Are they locked in?
I think among the neutral group, you can change some minds. Yeah, okay. It'll depend on if any more details about the extent of things, who knew what, and if there's a more clear way, I guess, to kind of define the impact of it all outside of. I think for Ohio State fans, I think it's pretty cut and dry. Like all of a sudden, Michigan became a team that can beat Ohio State rather handily. How did that happen? Which I don't think is actually a wrong way to view it. But I think for more neutral people, there's an opportunity to clarify some things one way or the other that can change some minds. Yeah.
Yeah. Derek chimes in. We have enough hate to hate Michigan and the South. Oh, isn't that heartwarming?
Love that.
Does that make it? Yeah.
It's great.
I'm not telling you, that is actually what I'm asking. I am not telling you to not sports hate your rival, because we're not trying to diminish Northern rivalries, but save a little hate for the South. That's a t-shirt, right? Can't we save a little
that's
hate?
good.
If I had my Nashville guitar, save a little hate for them, save a little hate for them. Yeah, save some hate
Yeah.
for the South. That's all. Not only your neighbor, not only your neighbor.
But we're not gonna. I'm not gonna ask. I'm not gonna ask an Ohio State fan to like root for Michigan to beat Alabama in the Rose Bowl. And I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do the opposite either, or the
I
inverse.
might ask them to do that. I actually might ask them to do that.
You can ask them, but I can tell you the answer if you'd like.
But don't you feel like in the South they hate each other, but when it comes to that, they do put that aside and root for the South?
Yeah, because they don't take things seriously. Yeah, they don't take rivalry seriously. Actually, I don't know that. I don't think Alabama and Auburn fans are pulling for each other. I think that's and I don't think. I think what you're talking about, that dynamic is possible in the North, just not with these two teams. Probably not with Iowa and Iowa State. I don't think it's possible with Oregon and Michigan. Like some of those rivalries are just too deep seated, man. They operate outside of what you're asking for. But I don't know if those dynamics exist very much in the South. Like Auburn, Alabama, Texas A&M maybe, but Texas, Oklahoma, obviously.
Like Cam Newton wins the national title at Auburn. Were Alabama fans rooting for Auburn in the national title game, or they were like, I can't imagine Auburn gets blown out?
I hope not. I hope they weren't. That kind of makes
you
me
hope
sick.
They weren't. You don't. So the rival. Okay. So local rivals matter so much that you can never unite in the face of a common enemy, which is the South.
Yeah, I don't ever want to hear. I don't think I ever want to hear about a Michigan fan rooting for Ohio State or vice versa.
Oh,
sorry.
That's what I want to do on the show. I want to bring people together. There he says, I think you're asking too much, Doug. Okay. I might be. So this is some specific critiques that I wanted to respond to before we get into. We each have 5 thoughts about Michigan that we will state for the record so people know where we stand on Michigan. Brandon made this point when I was saying, like, let's not be hot take artists. Like when I was mad on Twitter about like Desmond Howard. It was a Michigan guy, but it was the point. It wasn't who said it. It was the point that like, should Ryan Day get fired if Ohio State doesn't win the national championship kind of discussion, which I just think is not a healthy discussion no matter who says that. Brandon said on Twitter, KOTN was my favorite pod, but when I tried to pull you back after this particularly reckless segment, my concern was never addressed. So I told Brandon we would address it. The segment, Bill, is when he did not like when you questioned whether maybe like Mike McDonald or some of these other Michigan assistant coaches who were there during the Connor Stallion stuff actually maybe aren't that good of coaches. He's now the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. Was he maybe propped up by getting the signs from Connor Stallions, and now he got an NFL head coaching job out of it? Brandon considered that a reckless segment. Do you stand by those opinions of questioning whether the Michigan coaches looked better than they were because of what might have been happening with Connor Stallions, or do you want to rephrase anything?
Well, that's one of my 5 things. So I guess we're jumping the gun a little bit. I think the way that was received is not the way that I meant to state it. So if I worded it poorly, I apologize for that. I guess what I was trying to say was like, I wonder if at all NFL teams are like second guessing themselves on something. I wasn't saying like these guys definitely aren't as good as they are perceived to be. It just makes me wonder if like both on like a personnel player level as guys are getting drafted and like making decisions on coaching staff, if anyone in the NFL thought to themselves like, well, wait, let me dive in on this a little more because this is kind of a weird extenuating circumstance that I do think helped Michigan in some way. But not in so much of a way that like, I think Mike McDonald and Jesse Minter are bad coaches. I think they're very good defensive coaches. And I think Michigan has a lot of talent, which is one of the points I wanted to make later on. So I guess I would want to rephrase it if I worded it poorly, because my opinion is not that Michigan had bad players who were propped up or Michigan had bad coaches who were propped up. Like I don't actually feel that way.
You were thinking of it like from an employer standpoint. You're an NFL team that hired this guy. Now you watch whatever has come out about Connor Stallions, and would you think to yourself, oh, is that why this guy looks so good? Well, it would at least be in your head as an employer. Okay.
Yes.
Point taken on that. Listen, we're not here to kiss everybody's butt and apologize. We just want to make sure we have an understanding. We want you guys, and this is the we want you guys to know what we think. So we want to state it not once and for all, but we just want to have a clear understanding of what we actually think about this stuff. I did ask on Twitter, 2 people responded about do you have what are your thoughts on us? Do you think we're anti-Michigan? This is someone who said, I'm a Michigan Navy fan. Y'all have seemed to be pretty fair given the highly divergent takes among Northern fan bases. For instance, Michigan versus Michigan State as it relates to this. My stance is that Michigan broke a rule that is likely getting bent across the country. You can debate the effect on 21 and 22, but 2023 is untainted in my eyes. So that person who is a Michigan fan thinks we've been pretty fair. And this is our guy, John, who is a Michigan fan who we correspond with a lot on Twitter. He's a very loyal fan of KOTN, and we appreciate that. Are Doug and Bill anti-Michigan? Anti is too strong a word, but they have to acknowledge they swim in the Columbus environment and interact with people that have a favorable, at the least, view of Ohio State. All things Michigan are being consumed through that lens. I don't know that we can disagree with that at this point, because obviously we have over time interacted with more Ohio State people than anywhere else in the North. And again, I hope it doesn't cause us to view things as if we are employed by Ohio State. But these, as John said, these are the waters that we've been swimming in. I understand that point that John is making, Bill.
No, as do I. Even for me, I to take it back even further before my time covering Ohio State, I went to Penn State. So I know a whole lot of people at Penn State who like Michigan too. For a very large portion of my life, I've been around a lot of people who don't like Michigan. I don't consider myself necessarily someone who harbors hate for Michigan. But the sentiment has been around me for a very long time. So it's hard to avoid and hard for that sentiment, I think, to sometimes not color my analysis of things.
Yeah. And this is a review. So we appreciate any thumbs on YouTube. That's awesome. If you're here and you're not subscribed on YouTube, it'd be awesome if you subscribe. If you tell a friend about the show, if you think it's a decent show and you want to say, hey, have you checked out this Kings of the North thing? If you want to spread the word, holy moly, that would be awesome. But we certainly also take reviews on Apple Podcasts, because that is a very easy way for people to give longer reviews. And I check on the reviews every now and then, especially the ones that are Doug should be fired. This is a review that was titled Solid Potential. I was very into the show at first, but increasingly it seems to be pro-North, anti-Michigan. While the rest of college football is moving on and giving Michigan credit for its success, these guys seem to take every opportunity available to question whether the Stallions' harebrained scheme was responsible for Michigan's success. Those that know ball know that sign stealing is a marginal advantage, and sending your mom to record signs at games is marginal stacked upon marginal. But Doug postulates that Michigan beating Ohio State by 15 and 22 in back-to-back years was because of Stallions' nonsense. I don't even think it's intentional, but these guys are based in Columbus, so it's hard to filter out all the noise they must get. So again, that is a view of a person says they were into the show. So we accept all critiques and criticisms. We're not saying we're going to change what we think based on them, but we want to acknowledge that we have divergent fan bases here that in some way we're trying to bring together, even if they don't want to be brought together, Bill. So we wanted to acknowledge all that off the top. We are getting some more YouTube comments here. Someone says, now there's people calling each other names on YouTube. That's good. It's good to interact during the show. We've laid it out there, right? Before we get to what we think, we've laid out that people have some of these questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to your big 5 thoughts. I asked us to put together each sort of 5 overall framing thoughts for what we think of Michigan. And again, we have the big Michigan-Texas big game breakdown coming. It's not just feelings. I like to talk about feelings in football because the culture matters, how people absorb things, what it means to your life, all that matters. I don't just want to have random screaming debates. We understand this is big. People feel this stuff in their hearts. So, but we don't want to only talk about things. We want to talk about ball. So we have a big ball breakdown coming. Bill Landis, your 5 overarching feelings about Michigan, what are they?
Yeah, I think the first is what we talked about earlier, is that I believe that Michigan has / had really good players and really good coaches And a large part of its rise is because they were talented and they were old and they played really good football. And like, I think Jesse Minter, or I guess to start with Mike McDonald, was an incredible hire by Jim Harbaugh. He was a really like good, versatile defensive coordinator who helped push Michigan forward to become a championship level program. They've had 27 players drafted since 2022. Like the NFL, I don't think is in the business of routinely taking guys from a program if they think they're bad players. So like clearly a lot of this has to do with talent and coaching acumen. My next point would be that like I think very highly of Jim Harbaugh as a head coach. I think he's an excellent football coach. I think he got a little, like, lucky is not the right word, but some things broke his way in 2020. Because I think if that was a real football season that ended with Michigan again losing to Ohio State, I don't think he would have gotten the chance to reset the way that he did. So there was a little bit of a break there for him, I think, that year. But he won 10 games a few times prior to that at Michigan. He was good in the NFL. I think he will be good in the NFL in the second stint. I think Jim Harbaugh is a good coach. I think the impact of the sign stealing by Connor Stallions was beyond the norm of everybody does it. I think that everybody does do it. It's not illegal to watch an opponent from your own sideline while you're playing them and try to decipher their signals, or to do it from the press box while you're playing them, or if you catch something on coach's tape to try to decipher that and give yourself an edge. I think every team does that, and every team that's not doing that is stupid. I think that Connor Stallions went above and beyond in getting more information, and I think that gave Michigan more of an edge than teams who do it just sort of the normal way. And I also think they did it and they got caught, so Michigan has to now deal with the consequences. I don't like the deflecting of, well, what about this team? What about this team? Let me throw out this harebrained conspiracy theory with no way to back it up. If you have evidence of the thing that you want to throw out there as a counter to Connor Stallions, I'm all ears, but you don't have it. So until you do, you got caught, man. I'm sorry. It was, you broke the rules. It was, I think, pretty egregious and brazen. And you got caught. So whatever the NCAA decides to do, and maybe it won't be all that harsh, but whatever the NCAA decides to do, I think you just have to own it. And it seems like Michigan, based off Ward manuals, where it's just kind of accepted that fact. But I also think that Michigan beyond this will still be good. We'll still be relevant in the Big Ten. We'll still be relevant in the North. We'll still be relevant nationally, because I think Sherrone Moore is a pretty good football coach. And I think that there is a blueprint there that was laid by Jim Harbaugh for how to make Michigan a successful, nationally relevant program that has nothing to do with the Connor Stallion stuff. So even when that is presumably gone and out of the equation, I expect Michigan to kind of hold its status, maybe not as a perennial national title contender. I don't think they're quite that kind of program, but to be good in the Big Ten and to occasionally be in that national title conversation. I think that's where Michigan is going to live.
Well stated, Bill Landis. Now we never have to talk about it again. So
Great.
we just point to this, like, we'll just run the clip. It's like, hey, what does Bill think about this? It's like, he said it already. And on this show, once we say something once, we will never say it again. We promise you that. I say the same thing 9 times within the same paragraph most of the time. So that actually is not the case. But I hope that's helpful. For the record, those are Bill Landis's primary and complete thoughts about the Michigan Wolverines. Here are mine. Number one is that I think good Michigan is better for the Big Ten and better for the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry. And I wrote this a ton. While Ohio State between 2005 and 2019 was winning 15 of 16 against Michigan, between 2001 and 2019 was winning 17 of 19. I started covering Ohio State in 2005. Ohio State had lost to Michigan in 2004, and then I didn't see Ohio State lose to Michigan in a normal year until 2021. The only loss was the 2011 year when Ohio State's entire season got blown up because of their transgressions and the NCAA sanctions that were part of that. And I longed for a competitive rivalry. I wrote a ton of things about wishing that this rivalry would live up to its historic standard. And the idea that the rivalry was between 2001 and 2019, Ohio State was 17-2 against Michigan. Between 1988 and 2000, Michigan was 10-2-1 against Ohio State. Like, that is that is 30 years of non-competitiveness. Now, some of the individual games are competitive, right? And the teams are good in the same year, and you think it's going to be a great game. The 2016 game was a great game, right? The 2013 game was a great game. I covered a lot of great 2006 stands on its own. I covered a lot of great games, but like Ohio State always won when I was here. And before I got here, they always lost. Between 1969 and 1987, 1969 is the beginning of the 10-year war. Those 19 years, it's 9-9-1. Like, that's kind of what I want as somebody who wants a rivalry to be at its best. I did a whole thing one time when Ohio State was playing tough games against Michigan State. I spent a whole week asking, do you not allow green ink in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center? Because Michigan State's your real on-field rival now. It's not Michigan. Mm-hmm. So I wanted Michigan to be good my whole career of being a college football writer. All I wanted was Michigan to be good. So that Michigan is good, I'm like super fired up about that. Now, a lot of Ohio State fans, when I was particularly covering Ohio State, would say, you are a crazy person. Stop talking and stop writing. Because Ohio State fans would say, I don't care if they're good or not. I just want Ohio State to win every single time. So Ohio State fans are happy to beat Michigan when it's Rich Rodriguez, Michigan, or Brady Hoke, Michigan. But I want Michigan to be good. So the fact that they are good, I think is awesome. That's number one. Number two is that I thought Jim Harbaugh was a great hire, but I really thought he went about it in a weird way for a while. And I could not figure the guy out. I thought he was doing strange things. I thought, like, I had a confrontation with him at Big Ten Media Days after, like, he had kind of gone after Gene Smith, the Ohio State athletic director, in a way that I was like, what is he doing? Like, why is he doing this? And I think in hindsight, he was much more crazy like a fox than crazy. I think he was doing things to take pressure off his own team and his own program while they built something. He was like, I'll do the stuff. I'll take off my shirt at a recruiting camp. I'll climb a tree. I'll sleep at a recruit's house, and I'll be the one so nobody notices or focuses as much on the fact that, like, we're not beating Ohio State. And I think it was strategic, but I still thought, like, man, this guy's a good football coach, but I'm not sure what's up with this dude. Mm-hmm. Number three, I thought overhauling the coaching staff. I think it was 7 new assistants after 2020. And I said it immediately. It's like, I thought it was great. I thought it was a coach making decisions, maybe forced into decisions, but I thought he made great hires. Mike McDonald first and foremost. But it was instantaneous, right? And now, again, it was right as Connor Stallions got going, but, like, it was instantaneous. I think a lot of credit goes to Jim Harbaugh and all those new assistants. Sharon Moore, part of that, right? For, like, overhauling that and those guys making an instant impact. Number 4 for me is Connor Stallions broke the rules, gave them an edge that helped a very good Michigan team get over the top in 21 and 22. 2023, I am apt to say that, like, especially the national title, like, they got caught and they got punished and they overcame the punishments in the midst of the season. But I do think it gave him an edge in 21 and 22, and maybe really specifically 22, because 21, when it was snowing and it's like a snow globe and they come out on the field and Aiden Hutchinson, and, like, in the moment as that game started, I was like, oh, this could be a problem for Ohio State. I thought you could feel it in the stadium in 21. Yeah. And I think last year, like, even talk to people, I think they just were, like, very possibly, like, it's like better than Ohio State. And Ohio State was right there. They were right there. But I think Michigan, like, was awesome last year and just better than Ohio State. So now we're down to, like, one game. Like, the 22 game in Ohio Stadium is the one that I would say maybe Connor Stallions or any advanced scouting gave the biggest edge to Michigan. But I do think it provided an edge, and I think they did it by breaking the rules. So you and I agree on that. Now, again, I am not caught up in the punishment primarily because I don't know that anybody would have faith in the NCAA here. And I do think they're not going to take the title away. And all right, they punish him going forward. I know there are a lot of Ohio State fans that want them punished the way Ohio State was punished when they had their transgressions. They got a bowl ban, that kind of thing. I understand wanting that. My main thing is, like, I'm not hung up on that. And I would advise anyone not to get hung up on that, because I think you might be disappointed. Mm-hmm. So to me, when I say let history be the judge, that's going to be a judge and jury no matter what. And to put your faith or your hopes in the NCAA, I just don't think you might be setting yourself up to be disappointed. And then I think they should be able to sustain a fairly high level of success under Sharon Moore, but probably not to a national title level. I think maybe last year was rare, both because of Harbaugh and everything everybody knows about with the players who stayed. But I think they'll be a fairly regular playoff participant. I think they can have peak years within that, and I think it's good for the sport if they do. Do you have any questions about my 5, Bill?
No, I would just say I think if they are able to attract quarterbacks like they got Jaden Davis, if they're able to attract quarterbacks, like, moving forward into the future, then I think that there is a chance for Michigan to still be, like, national title level. Because I still, like, they'll get good defensive players, it'll get good linemen. It's always going to be able to run the ball. If you can find yourself a JJ McCarthy type every couple of years. I think Michigan's ceiling is not perennial national title contender, but like I said, the ability to spike to that level from time to time. I guess the only other thing I'd ask you is like how getting the opportunity to reset after 2020 like impacts your view of Harbaugh. Because I believe, and I think a lot of people agree, that he would not have gotten that reset under normal circumstances.
I am not super caught up in that because it was a worldwide pandemic and it blew up a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter didn't get to go on her 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C. It's not like there's like you can what if the whole globe from that. And so that is not, I don't necessarily disagree with it that Michigan took advantage of that opportunity and it felt like things were shifting and then the reset, taking a breath. I think there might have been a mental thing too, that Michigan was able to reset in a certain way, but like, it's not super high on my list because it's not like, I mean, that would be a story. It's not like somebody at Michigan caused a global pandemic to make it happen, right? It's just like the fact I mean, not that we know of, right? You're not saying that, are you?
I'm not saying that Michigan caused a global pandemic.
Okay,
I would be lying. I would be lying if I didn't say like a little part of me is wondering if Michigan could have actually played Ohio State that year.
Yeah, no, and that was a conspiracy theory from the jump. I mean, Ohio State people were saying that. I'm not saying like people in the building, but people I heard, everyone. So like but again, like I'm, that's not a huge priority for me. I will say this discussion, there's somebody in the comments who said Doug is a dumbass, and I can't tell what part of it which I think is right. Like, because it could be, I could be a dumb guy either way here, that I'm too harsh on Michigan or too light on Michigan. So I think part of that is the point that when we're doing a show where we want to welcome both Ohio State fans and Michigan fans and fans of neither of those teams to a discussion, you're going to have people mad. So like, we understand that. And so we just wanted to state for the record where we are. Did we do that?
I think so. Like, I think as best as we could. I wasn't not necessarily out to change any minds, but I think it's good to get the cards on the table, as you said.
Yeah. So the cards are on the table, and nobody is happy about it.
Yeah.
We're your favorite college football show that makes no one happy. So but we're going to break down some ball. So we'll take a break. Yeah. When we come back, Bill and I will do our big game breakdown of Texas and Michigan, noon on Saturday. We'll get to that right after this on Kings of the North. We are back on Kings of the North for this Texas-Michigan game on Saturday, Bill. They've only met once before, which is fascinating to me. And again, which is why these are two really good football teams with a lot of players and that people care about. But also when you have these blue bloods that don't have a huge history, their only meeting was the Rose Bowl on January 1st, 2005. It was a 38-37 Texas win. They kicked a field goal in the last play of the game. That was Chad Henne versus Vince Young. Think of how far removed we are from that. So this is awesome that this is happening. This series is this year, and then the next game in Austin will be 2027. And the reason for that, I mean, like Texas is playing Ohio State in 2025 and 2026. So this is a home and home, but there's a little bit of a break in between. When this was agreed to in 2014, at the time it was agreed to, Brady Hoke was the Michigan coach and Charlie Strong was the Texas coach. And in 2014, Steve Sarkisian, who is now the Texas coach, was in his first year as the USC head coach. He had just left Washington. And in 2014, Sharon Moore was in his first year as the Central Michigan tight ends coach, because he had been at Louisville with Charlie Strong, and Charlie Strong got the Texas job for the 2014 season. And I don't know what the story was there, but like, he didn't go to Texas with Charlie Strong. So he wound up going to Central Michigan, which he wound up being at Michigan. So like, this is, you think about that. It's like, oh, hey, Texas and Michigan agreed to a series. I wonder who the Michigan head coach will be when they play. It'll be like, I don't know. I think it might be the guy who just got hired to coach tight ends at Central Michigan. Football's crazy, man.
I didn't know that there was that connection there. I'm not like super familiar with Sharon Moore's background, because I just know him as the Michigan guy. But that's interesting.
Yeah. So let's get to our breakdown. We're going to open with the Texas offense versus the Michigan defense. This is the money breakdown, and this is why we always give it to Bill. Quinn Ewers and the Texas offense against this great Michigan defense, Will Johnson and Mason Graham, and the rest. We'll break it down, run game and pass game. Where do you want to start, Bill?
I think before we get into the nitty gritty of that, maybe just like kind of like resetting what these teams lost from last year on these particular sides of the ball, because Texas and Michigan were so visible for a lot of people, obviously going to the playoff last year. So Michigan didn't lose a ton of people from its defense, but it did lose some pretty impactful people from its defense. Chris Jenkins at defensive tackle, Mike Sainer still at cornerback, both linebackers, Junior Colson and Michael Barrett, went off to the NFL draft. Defensive end Jalen Harrell was drafted. They're also without Rod Moore, safety, who was a projected starter this year but got injured, so he's not available either. And then Texas lost a lot from its offense last year. Xavier Worthy at receiver, A.D. Mitchell at receiver, Jatavian Sanders at tight end, who was like a quasi receiver, Christian Jones at offensive tackle is gone, Jonathan Brooks at running back is gone, Jordan Whittington at receiver is gone. And so I was like looking just through some stuff from last year. Texas has a bunch back on the offensive line and obviously has Quinn Ewers back. Besides that, it is a pretty drastic makeover on offense for the Longhorns, and they ended up losing CJ Baxter at running back in the offseason as well to an injury. So with Baxter out, Texas has lost its top 6 players by targets from last year. Wow. And it is down its top 2 ball carriers from last year with Jonathan Brooks and Baxter injured. So Michigan had to plug some holes on defense, but Texas is plugging more with its offense. So if you're thinking about who has like its second game of the season, continuity matters, all that stuff, who has a little more continuity, I think it's probably Michigan, but Texas has the continuity where you would want it most, which is on the offensive line and at quarterback with Quinn Ewers returning. So that's kind of setting the table, I guess, personnel wise with these two sides of the ball. And then I guess like Texas trying to run on Michigan, I think is interesting, because I'm not even entirely sure if Texas should try to run on Michigan based off of
failure.
Yeah, based off the strengths of both of these sides. Michigan returned those 2 tackles, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. I love their linebackers, Jayshon Barham, transfer from Maryland, and Ernest Hausman, who's in his second year after transferring from Nebraska. It's just like a really strong, stout defense up the middle. And granted, like they're playing a Mountain West team in their opener against Fresno State, but Fresno State could not do anything against that Michigan front 7, and they could not run the ball. And Texas has I think a pretty good offensive line. They have a star in left tackle Kelvin Banks, but I think I think the real strength of Texas's offensive line is just sort of its experience. I don't know if outside of Kelvin Banks, there's a lot of sort of like elite players up front. And I think if Texas gets into a situation where it's going to like try to run the ball and control some clock and try to out physical and try to bully, play like a Big Ten style against Michigan's defense, I just don't think that's going to end very well for Texas. I don't know if that's where the edges are for Texas.
Yeah.
And I liked what I saw from watching Texas's opener against Colorado State from Jaden Blue, who's going to be, I guess they're the number 1 ball carrier now with CJ Baxter out. He played a decent amount last year. And Jarek Brooks is a true freshman who's got a little juice to him. It's like it's not like they're short on options to run the ball. I just think you're leaning too much into what Michigan's strengths appear to be defensively if you're going to show up in Ann Arbor and try to establish the run against Michigan.
That makes sense, especially with CJ Baxter out, right? Like that was every I think, there are a lot of people who were high on Texas in the offseason. You lose your starting running back. And when they lost Jonathan Brooks to the NFL after last year, like that was, it took people back, a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the pass game just looks dangerous enough that use the pass game as the run game, right? Throw some bubble screens, throw to your swing passes to your backs. Quinn Ewers looks in control. I think I agree with the idea of this is not where the game is going to be won or lost, because Texas might just admit we can't do it. We can't run the ball against them.
Yeah, and I'm sure they'll try because, Quinn Ewers is very good off play action. He was one of the best quarterbacks in the country off play action last year. He's really good in the RPO game, just like super quick with his decision making and super quick to get the ball out. So it's not like Texas is not going to try to run the ball at all. I think they do need to run it some to set up a lot, not a lot of what they want to do throwing the ball, but a decent chunk of what they want to do throwing the ball. But yeah, I think if Texas's running backs have an impact on this game, it'll be more in the pass game.
Okay.
There were a lot of swing passes against Colorado State. It's a little hard to gauge exactly, I think, what Texas might try to do in this game, because I just don't think they were showing a whole lot against Colorado State. They didn't have to. You have to go back to last year a little bit, I think, to see more of what they were doing in some of its bigger games. And Steve Sarkisian will definitely, have some ball plays, have some reverses, have a lot of shifts and motions, and try to get Michigan's defense moving side to side and try to open some stuff up down the field. And I thought at times that Michigan's defense looked a little suspect against the pass against Fresno State. It was not like a game-long thing, but Fresno State started to find some stuff in the fourth quarter throwing the ball.
And that's a decent quarterback.
It's a good quarterback. They have pretty good skill there too for a Mountain West team. Yeah, we obviously like Quinn Ewers quite a bit. He's a very good quarterback. The receiver position is remade at Texas. They have Isaiah Bond, the transfer from Alabama, Matthew Golden, transfer from Houston, and Silas Bolden, the transfer from Oregon State. And then I guess maybe the fourth receiver there is probably Ryan Wingo, who's a 5-star freshman who's going to be pretty good. But the chemistry between Quinn Ewers and all those new guys, like I thought looked pretty good in the opener. So I'm not super worried about them showing up to Ann Arbor and not being able to kind of click in the way they need to hit some big plays. I do think Michigan's secondary probably needs to play a little better than it played against Fresno State. Part of Fresno State finding success throwing the ball, like, definitely stemmed from Michigan rotating a decent amount on the back end of its defense. 17 guys played 20 snaps at least in against Fresno State, and it wasn't a runaway that would allow you the opportunity to do that. Like, Michigan clearly came in with a plan to play a lot of guys on defense, I think, no matter how the game was going. I wonder if they might trim that a little bit. I know that Michigan wanted to do that all year last year because it kept guys fresh for the fourth quarter, kept guys fresh, obviously, in the back half of the season. I don't know that the depth is quite there in the way it was last year to do that, especially at cornerback. So if the starting secondary kind of stays out there, then I think Michigan stands a decent chance of hanging with Texas's receivers. But I think I would give the edge to Texas if we're just talking receivers against defensive backs. And even if you want to say whoever Will Johnson's covering, you could eliminate that guy. I think Texas might have a little too much speed and skill at the other spots for Michigan to really get a handle on that. So then it just becomes about whether or not you can bother Quinn Ewers in a way that limits that passing attack. And I think they could. Maybe Michigan could, because I thought Josiah Stewart was awesome at defensive end in that first game. I thought both Michigan defensive ends, he and Derek Moore, both were very good in that opener. And I think Wink Martindale, the new defensive coordinator, is going to try to get after Quinn Ewers a little bit too. They blitzed a decent amount against Fresno State. There was a noticeable uptick in blitz percentage from Michigan with Wink Martindale running things compared to what we've seen the last couple of years with Jesse Minter and Mike McDonald. That's a little feast or famine, I guess, at times.
Yeah.
It largely worked against Fresno State, but Fresno State also scored its only touchdown of the game in the fourth quarter to make it a one-score game, by the way, because Michigan went cover 0 and got beat on 3rd and 8. And that was one of those plays where it's is that the right time to do that? Maybe just try to play it sound and hold them to a field goal. So if Wink Martindale is really ramping up the pressure I don't think Quinn Ewers gets terribly bothered by pressure. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a kind of back and forth in Wink Martindale's mind about when should I dial it up, when shouldn't I dial it up, unless they can just get pressure with 4. But for as good as I thought Michigan's defensive front played against Fresno State, I don't know if getting pressure with 4 is something you can rely upon against this Texas front. So I think the thing I'm most curious about when I think about Michigan's defense against Texas's offense is how much Wink Martindale is going to blitz Quinn Ewers.
Yeah. Quinn Ewers' very first throw of that Colorado State game was like a tight window, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like right in a guy's numbers. And he just looked pretty unbothered most of the game. And it's just one of those, if he's an unbothered tight window veteran quarterback now, then sometimes you can have great coverage and a guy like that still makes a play. And it's like he's keeping Arch Manning on the bench. And I have gone back and forth at times about like what Quinn Ewers is and isn't. I thought that was that was a very grown up performance, I thought, in week 1. Yeah. And that anybody, this is Michigan has one of the best defenses in the country. Like anybody watching that, I thought it was like, okay, like this is going to be tough to deal with this guy because I don't think we're going to shake him. So I do think the Texas passing game is, but if you're going to have that, I mean, like, give me Will Johnson to start with, right? I mean, like that's a good way to start with pass defense. But I think Quinn Ewers has a chance to have a big game.
Yeah.
All right, other side of the ball, Michigan offense versus Texas defense, and let's talk about running it first of all. Texas lost 2 defensive tackles who were among the best defensive tackles in the country last year. One to the first round of the draft, one to the second round of the draft. They're playing guys now who are like veteran guys who have been around, which kind of means they weren't quite good enough to beat out the guys who were there before, and they stuck around and they've played 49 career games and they've made some starts and that kind of thing. But I think you can see the drop off, right? And that's me being less of a hardcore ball guy than you, that I think Michigan has an opportunity there. Now, I do think it felt like the Texas linebackers got downhill against Colorado State. I actually thought Colorado State ran the ball okay at times, and I think they averaged 3.7 yards per carry, so it's not like they were all over the place. But Anthony Hill Jr. and David Benda at linebacker, both, like Hill especially, he's a young guy. I think he was a freshman All-American last year. They talk about him as a future star. I mean, the future might be here. He's going to be chasing guys down, and I think they're going to be downhill because I don't know that anybody is scared of the Michigan passing game right now. So I think their linebackers are going to be downhill in holes. And the Michigan offensive line, they admit they didn't play great last week. I know Josh Priebe has talked this week, and they all say they got to play better. They're working on, I think this week in practice, not moving guys in and out as much, just playing the same group of 5. They lost so much. I mean, they basically lost their entire offensive line from last year. And one of the things, Bill, is they've had excellent center play. You and I were in love with Oluwolowatimi a couple years ago, and Drake Nugent last year was really good. They hit twice in a row at center, and it's hard to keep doing that. So Texas, I think their defensive front, their interior is not as good, but I think Michigan up front, their interior is not as good. So
yeah,
I think Michigan has to try. I do think you might be able to run on Texas this year, but it has to be maximum Michigan. The offensive line has to play better. Khalil Mullings is probably going to get a lot of work here. We've talked about the idea that, you know, is he more of a hammer than Donovan Edwards is? Will he be a guy who they lean on for the rushing attack here? I think maybe in the past you would have said, I don't know if you can run on Texas. I think maybe you can, but Michigan has to run it better, and the offensive line has to play better than it did in week 1.
Yeah, it does feel to me a little bit like maybe Texas's defense has flipped from last year. It was like you couldn't really run on them because of what they had in the middle, but you could throw on them if you had time to do it. And now this year, maybe you can run on them a little bit, and they've kind of retooled the secondary in a way that might make them a little better pass defense wise. But I was looking up just like some advanced stat stuff. I didn't want to like layer this preview with that, but I do think maybe these 2 numbers could be important. I don't want to rely on them too much because it was week 1. They were playing an overmatched opponent. Maybe they just weren't showing a whole lot and doing a whole lot. But Texas came out of week 1 defensively, ranked 76th in the country in rushing success rate and 93rd in the country in front 7 havoc rate. So there just wasn't a whole lot going on up front for them against Colorado State. And that could certainly just be the byproduct, like I said, of just keeping it pretty vanilla. I don't think they'll be vanilla against Michigan. But I think a lot of times when coaches kind of speak in the cliche of you make the biggest jump from week 1 to week 2, I think a lot of that has to do with offensive line play. So if Michigan's offensive line is going to put forth a better effort this week, like I could definitely see some opportunity there. I think you need a good Donovan Edwards game, though. I think you need the Donovan Edwards who typically shows up in big games and gives you like an 80-yard touchdown run kind of out of nowhere. I don't think if Michigan gets the same effort that it got from Donovan Edwards last week, that it can run the ball effectively enough to win this game. But maybe they do get a good version of Donovan Edwards.
Yeah, but I think they have to run it because Michigan can't throw to win, I don't think, in this game. And I do agree with you that I think
so either.
Everybody last year thought you could throw on Texas. You and I think both picked Washington to beat Texas last year in the semifinal because I think we both thought it was like the worst version of a matchup for Texas to go against Michael Penix and Rome Odunze in that passing attack because that was the weakness last year. But Jaden Barron is back. He had a pick in the opener. He was second team All SEC in the preseason. They have a couple other corner. I think they're better at corner. I think they have some decent safeties, and I agree with you. It's flipped. I think now the way to try to beat Texas is to try to run on Texas. So like that's what Michigan that fits Michigan, right? So like last year you would have wanted to be Washington against Texas. Now I think you want to be Michigan, but they have to throw it better. So the receivers were basically not involved in week 1. Colston Loveland, the tight end, who's probably the best tight end in the country, had 8 catches on 9 targets. The receivers didn't do much. Tyler Morris had 3 catches. Samaj Morgan had 2. Like, the run game, they ran a jet sweep to Samaj Morgan on the first drive and that kind of thing. JJ McCarthy really was effective the last couple years in just being a guy who could make a couple plays a game. And last year in adjusted completion percentage on throws of 20 yards or more, JJ McCarthy was number 2 in the country behind the guy who won the Heisman. So JJ McCarthy only threw about 3 passes per game last year that were more than 20 yards down the field. But when he did, Michigan was really effective at that. Davis Warren was 0 of 3 on passes of 20 yards or more in game 1. So they have to have at least a little bit of the threat of that to open things up for the run game, and they don't yet. And I think they have to try. And so they know that, like, the receivers just have to be more impactful. It can't only be Colston Loveland. Davis Warren, 15 of 25 for 118 last week. Again, I don't think they're showing everything either. It's the first start for a guy. We get that. His average depth of target was like, okay. He threw a pick on a deep ball. Like, you understand that. And he played 53 plays, and Alex Orji only played 9. So I don't know. I certainly am not necessarily anticipating that, they were just holding Alex Orji and now he's going to play 20 or 30 snaps. I don't know. Maybe that will be a bigger package for them. But this is the greatest concern for me, is that I do think Texas's pass defense is better. And I just don't know about Michigan's ability to get the ball to anybody who's not Colston Loveland.
Yeah, Michigan's receivers against Fresno State were targeted 13 times, which is pretty low. 6 catches for 34 yards out of that position group. It's just not good enough. And Davis Warren, I think, probably missed a couple of throws. Alex Orji definitely missed at least one throw that I can remember. So maybe they can clean some of that stuff up, but it just doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't feel to me like a dangerous receiving group. And now it's also, I think, the strength, as you laid out, of Texas's defense. Texas also added Andrew Makuba, a safety from Clemson. I think is pretty good.
Really good. That's a great transfer addition.
Yeah. So I don't love the sort of the opportunities there to throw the ball for Michigan necessarily. I actually am wondering a little bit if there is more Alex Orji stuff. If there's some 11-man run packages where you have Alex Orji out there as a guy you have to account for. They can get pretty creative with that kind of stuff. Like, we saw it as a wrinkle be effective a couple of years ago against Ohio State. They put Alex Orji in and they ran for 20 yards. You're not surprising people anymore with Alex Orji, but if you can block it up and you got to account for all 11 people, it's difficult to defend. And as we've said, like I don't think run defense necessarily is the strength of Texas's defense at the moment. So maybe there's something there. Maybe you get a really good Davis Warren game. I don't know. So it's like, or maybe the offensive line just takes takes a tangible step forward. Like I don't think Michigan is a lost cause in this game offensively. But it does feel like it's going to have to be like pretty high level execution, I think, for Michigan to score as much as it needs to score to win.
Our guy John in the YouTube comment says, I think it's pretty funny how last year it was Michigan carries JJ, he stinks. Now it's JJ was so good last year, Michigan can't win without an elite quarterback. It's crazy. I understand like feeling that. I did feel like that was a sentiment last year. Like I think in the moment, I don't know that I thought that was true. I thought JJ was exactly the type of quarterback who could make plays when you needed him to. And he did not carry the offense because he didn't have to carry the offense, but the NFL liked what they saw. And on third down, on a couple big shots per game in a way that really mattered, he really mattered. And the idea, like, again, that conversation was there for 2 years. Like Cade McNamara, they need better quarterback play than that. It got him to the playoff in 21, but JJ needs to elevate it. I think maybe in 22, he elevated it a little bit. I thought in 23, like, I think the Ohio State game was an example of it. Like just a couple throws a game that are elite throws. And Michigan's always going to be, I think, as you said, Sharon Moore, this is Jim Harbaugh DNA. They're always going to be a run-first team. You can see it with how they use personnel and line up and that kind of thing. But you have to have the threat of that enough to back people off a little bit. And that is what you have to, I mean, obviously, you're wondering about that right now when you have this quarterback situation. And if they can't do it, if they can't back them off and the linebackers get downhill and there's no threat with the receivers down the field, I think it could be a very long day for Michigan.
Yeah, I think it could as well. I do have like, there were just times last year, and like the personnel's different. I understand that, but like Michigan would just put out 7 offensive linemen, a couple of tight ends, create super wide rushing surfaces, and just kind of like dare you to be able to cover all of it, and then operate those run schemes with like expert efficiency and precision.
Yep.
And the idea of like, if you can get into that stuff, and then you have like Alex Orji as a runner to throw on top of it, like I can see that as a winning recipe for Michigan. Okay. I just don't know if their personnel, given that it's so new, is quite ready for that just yet.
All right. So let's go to our picks then. Bill Landis, what do you think is going to happen? This line was 3.5 before the season. After week 1, it moved as high as 7.5. Now what I'm seeing is down to 7. I think a lot of people is like, oh, now you're giving me like Michigan more than a touchdown. That becomes like a very appealing bet for people. And so I think the line has moved back a 0.5 point as a result. What's your pick for this?
Can I give you 2 things real quick before I give you my pick?
You can.
Texas was number 120 in the country last year in red zone touchdown percentage, which is like a statistical anomaly that it kind of makes no sense to me. They got to the playoff being that inefficient in the red zone. They were 7 of 7 against Colorado State, but I do think that's an area worth keeping an eye on because I don't think doing it that well against Colorado State means it's fixed. And then one other guy to mention, because we didn't really talk special teams. Dominic Zavada, Michigan's kicker, hit from 45, 53, and 55 last week against Fresno State. If it becomes a game where field goals matter, I can see him being a guy who maybe wins a game for Michigan. But I don't have Michigan winning. I have Texas winning 28-20. I just don't think there's enough for Michigan's offense to keep up. I don't think Texas's offense is going to go crazy on Michigan's defense because Michigan's defense, I think, is legitimately very good, especially in the front 7. I think they will give Texas, all it can handle. But there's enough explosive plays from Texas's offense to be the difference, and Michigan won't be able to respond in kind with its own offense. So a close game, I guess it's a cover, even with the expanded spread. But I have Texas 28-20.
And I have Texas 31-17. And again, I think this happens a lot where that's a 2-score game. It's a 1-score game and it's close and Michigan has an opportunity, but they can't quite take advantage in the second half. And now Texas, Michigan's trying to drive and they miss a 3rd down throw and they punt it back to Texas. Now Texas gets it back. Now they drive for a score to go ahead 14 with 7 minutes left, right? Now it's a 2-score game, but it's been a 1-score game for most of the game. I don't think Texas blows them off the field because I think the Michigan defense is too good for that. But a lot of this is just Quinn Ewers has been doing this and Davis Warren hasn't. And in a game like this, that is a huge edge. And I just think Quinn Ewers is not going to be rattled. And we did note that Quinn Ewers has addressed Michigan as the team up north, right? He has a little scooch of that Ohio State in him from his foray in Columbus for a year, and now he gets to go play in the big house, man.
Yeah, that's actually quite funny. And I think Ohio State fans will be cheering for Quinn Ewers this week.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things. But as Becky points out, we can hate both Michigan and the Southern schools. So again, like this is everybody, right? You got your rival, but let's just save a little bit of energy for the South. So again, I don't think Ohio State fans are going to root against Texas. Are going to root for Michigan and against Texas in this game. We get that. It would be great. I'm not, but like everybody else in the North, root for Michigan, right? Come on. I get it. When it's your rival, you get an exemption, but everybody else should be hoping Michigan gets this done. All right. That's our big game breakdown. I think on Thursday, our big game breakdowns, I think we might do Colorado, Nebraska, and Iowa State, because there's so many big games in the North here in week 2. So our picks are in. Bill Landis will leave us. And when we come back, special guest from Split Zone Duo. You know him, you love him, Stephen Godfrey will join us next on Kings of the North. We are back on Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises, joined now by Stephen Godfrey. I don't call you Stephen, call you Godfrey. Everybody call you Godfrey?
Yeah. If you called me Stephen, I would be very worried that I'd done something
strange.
to go to the principal's office.
Yeah. What do the people in your family call you?
Stephen, actually. My wife calls me Stephen, but not many people do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody knows you because you write in the Washington Post. You've been part of Split Zone Duo, the great national college football podcast for many years. You've done a bunch of other things, but every now and then you're going to come hang out on Kings of the North, right?
Yes, I'm very excited to add some much needed Southern levity to this crusade that you're on.
Southern levity. It is a crusade. Southern levity levity. Is that what you bring? Levity? Is that why you're here for the levity?
We invented wit. You know, Mark Twain, Faulkner. Come on. I don't know how much I've. Here's the deal. Because this is the first time I'm on, I have to gauge exactly how much I'm going to needle you. And then how much of this will be earnest. So, yes, tongue firmly planted in cheek.
I have, let me get my Faulkner reference chart. 1. Okay. All right. That is 1 for that. We are here to talk about, I like talking big picture with you. I came on Split Zone Duo, came down and saw you in Nashville. We did a show then sort of talking about like the idea for this show. But you have a view on the whole sport. Michigan and Texas are both good again. How cool is that? Wasn't it weird when they're not good?
No program is inherently necessary. Does that make sense? No program is inherently necessary for college football to be good. Okay. I don't know if you agree with me or not, because there are 30 to 40 to maybe even 50 that could rotate in at any given point. You can go through time and find something recognizable at any point in the sport's history as a comfort point before maybe you learn about some sort of new upstart. However, there is a satisfaction I think people get and a sense of security from helmet games. And this is a helmet game in that we are going to put 2 very recognizable national brands on the field in the regular season in an actual college football stadium against each other. And that is, I think, reassuring at like a sort of existential level, given everything that's going on in the sport, but it's also potentially just very good football. Maybe not the greatest football. If it had happened last year, maybe the greatest football, but decent football at least.
It's a helmet game. It's a tradition game, which is the same thing. And it's a money game, right?
Yes.
Because part of this is the money that these programs bring in and spend, Mike, we can put up the money graphic.
Okay.
There are 5 $200 million athletic departments by the latest Department of Education stuff that everybody has to send in. This is revenue. Ohio State is $251 million. Texas is $239 million. Alabama, $214 million. Michigan, $210 million. And Georgia, $203 million. So part of it, Godfrey, when programs like Texas and Michigan are not good, sometimes it's like, man, it can't really be a resources discussion. It can't really be a, there are plenty of other places where it's like, well, we got to build a practice facility. That's like, you get a coach gets fired, a new coach comes in, the first thing he wants to do is build a practice facility. Like, that's not the case with these schools, which is why when you were in the Rich Rodriguez and Brady Hoke era at Michigan, while you were in the Charlie Strong and Tom Herman era at Texas, it's like, it's unacceptable because they are both paying to win and earning money in a way that most schools don't do.
I would eliminate Georgia from the conversation we're about to have because I do believe there's a little bit of nouveau riche going on in that they fixed a tremendous amount of problems, systemic problems, maybe in the last 5 to 10 years. And my comp for that would actually probably be LSU, a pre-Saban LSU and a post-Saban LSU. But let's look at those top 4 for a second. I think what you have is a corporate mindset at all 4. And the intolerance tends to be stronger in more influential places when those programs are not effective, if you will. So you bring up the resources claim initially. It's both true and also decidedly false that you should be able to win at that school regardless of whatever the particular circumstance is. But let's talk about Texas for a second, specifically going into this Michigan game, because there are stories at Michigan about cultural issues. Right. We have, I think, approximately 200 books were written about Rich Rodriguez and why he wasn't a Michigan man. And we immediately ran him out of town and everything was right and good again at Michigan. Right. Okay. Texas operating as, I guess, the most stable entity or second most stable entity in the entire Southeastern Conference, if not one of the most stable entities in all of college football right now, is deeply shocking in a lot of circles. Both because it is Texas, which is sort of maybe it's again, I don't know how much this falls into regionality, a little bit of a punchline amongst the SEC, a brass, but also it's Steve Sarkisian that is inspiring or managing, allegedly, this level of stability at Texas. These were not predictions that anyone, myself included, and the most off-record conversations I was having when Sark came to Austin, no one predicted this. And so it's a bit of a shock there because if you go down that list and you don't win within, what do we say immediately? What we define immediately as 2.5 years now, maybe 2 seasons, I tops.
Think 3 is the max. 3 max.
Okay.
3 max, but by year 2, you're talking about it.
The track record of the post-Mac Brown championship era at Texas has been one of underperformance relative to investment. Full stop.
Yes.
No argument. Doesn't matter who it was. Really doesn't. It's almost nothing personal against Tom Herman or against Charlie Strong. Those, I think, are quality coaches. It's not like they forgot how to coach. But those eras at Austin were defined by what they could not do in spite of this asset, this investment, this building, et cetera, and so forth. So the fact that they have allegedly figured it out under Steve Sarkisian, who's had a very mercurial career path, at least in terms of at an executive level, combined with that booster core. And I'm not necessarily talking even about your rank and file $100 handshake booster. I'm talking about people with serious money. University of Texas, yes, but all kinds of money, international business money, and all across the energy sector. And Texas has kind of turned into a VC factory. This is and has been one of the more fascinating stories in college football that they could not get it together. I talked to 2 staffers after Herman got fired, and I said, what went, you don't just say, hey, what went wrong, especially in an off the record conversation. It's a little bit more, it's a little bit more specific and detailed than that. But I said, where did it turn? Because you had elements of something good coming through. And they said beating Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. And I said, well, that seems weird. That seems like that should have really, been the propulsion that sent the program into that next level for sure. Certainly in the old style of recruiting. And what they said was we could not keep the zeitgeist out of the building. No matter what Tom Herman tried to do, no matter what his assistants tried to do, no matter what the messaging was, Texas was so enamored with Texas that it was essentially a self-poisoning structure. And this was in a lot of circles as well. As we get into post-Saban and pre-Saban, we're going to start marking time like BC and AD in college football at the Saban retirement.
I love it. Absolutely.
But in the Saban era, the rebuke that he delivers to Austin has never, in my opinion, been fully explored. And that was that there's this famous sort of story I've told to different people at different times about how he brings Tuscaloosa to heel, if you will, how he breaks the problem in Tuscaloosa to create one of the most efficient college football structures ever made, if not the most efficient. And the consensus amongst people who would know is that he gave a sort of kind of gave an eye at Austin, didn't worry about the paycheck, because you could argue he was underpaid his entire career relative to what he generated.
Yes.
But he cast an eye at Austin and he thought, I don't know if I can clear all the noise out of this machine. If you believe that, and I do, having done this for a long time and talked to a lot of people, it's that much more shocking that one of his, I would honestly, if we're going to be honest, lesser than acolytes and Sarkisian ends up being the one who seemingly, and if you notice all the qualifiers I'm throwing in here, because we're talking about Texas in a very nascent state, one playoff appearance.
You don't want us to run this back in 2 years.
Oh God, right? No. And by the way, you joke, but that would not surprise me in any way, shape, or form. No. That's how fast things turn in Austin. So the fact that there's been this much stability under Sarkisian has been very interesting to me because, and I'm not going to measure any of this conversation against this Michigan team. I don't think that's fair to Moore. I don't think that's fair to Michigan. I think this is just circumstance, and that this was, if this game was being played last year, it would have been close to Titanic, I think, in terms of the competing forces. And we almost had it, right? We almost had it in the national championship game.
Absolutely.
But we didn't, and we don't, and this is what we have. So the fastest way, if you are just sort of a Big Ten focused fan, to look at the new SEC is this. There are two calm-ish, well-funded entities, and they're both on your top 5 list. Okay, Georgia and Texas, and we have Alabama, and we're not really sure what to do yet, right?
Yeah,
we don't know what yet that is, but we know based on the preseason media polling and just the general conjecture is that you have the east and the west side of this new Southeastern Conference, and the best and easiest way to define those are Alabama pre-Lane Kiffin and Alabama post-Lane Kiffin, meaning an offensive-minded Alabama structure in Texas and a defensive-minded Alabama structure in Athens. That's the fastest way to sort of understand what we're looking at. And what intrigues me about that is that certainly both of those plans have flaws. And let me back up and say, I think structurally, in terms of personnel evaluation, high school recruiting relationships, and general roster development, it's basically a sort of Alabama greatest hits album or a Saban greatest hits album in both of the structures of those rosters, the assistants, the methodology, the way they build their calendars. But then when you get to the philosophy of what you see on the field, it's Sark. He's going to be more offensive minded. It's Kirby Smart, who believes Alabama's greatest days when they were, putting Notre Dame in a slow cooker in the national championship game. And it doesn't matter if you only got 300 or 3.5 yards of play. You have the greatest defense in the country. Those are the two competing mentalities. I would open it to the floor. Which one potentially could fail first in a large stage moment, say against like an Ohio State come bracket time?
I mean, I guess is there inherently more distance between the ceiling and floor with an offensive thing, where Georgia to some extent is going to have a high floor, and then if they don't hit on a quarterback or they lose a couple receivers in the portal, where they get into a world where they're good but they can't get over the top, where maybe Sark is more peaks and valleys, but if he keeps bringing in Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning and quarterbacks of that level, maybe there won't be that many valleys. I don't know. Like, I always think you need a great quarterback to win, right? But I don't even know if that's true. I think it might just be a thing that a guy says into a microphone. What if it's take away Kirby and Sark? Which philosophy would you rather have your program built around right now? More offensive or more defensive?
Okay, if all things are roughly equal in personnel, isn't it? Look at what Georgia did last week, and I think that's way more of a statement against Clemson necessarily, but there was no rushing and concern of getting ATN in that game because Georgia just seems to generate running backs. So I'll tell you one thing. I'll say this: I'd much rather watch Texas. I'd much rather watch Texas play football. And if anyone wants to argue against the idea of stockpiling two amazing quarterbacks, and oh wow, okay,
no argument.
You look it fits. Would you like to discuss NASCAR?
I covered NASCAR. I covered Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s first NASCAR victory.
All right. Is there any?
I didn't really know what to ask him.
Do you have thoughts on like the new surface at Darlington or AMS?
Here's
Do you know what I'm saying right
story. Now? I was covering a NASCAR race, and they had a pizza food truck there, and I had a long drive back to my house, and so I went and I got a whole pizza, and I was taking it back to my car to drive home, and a shirtless, shoeless man on a bicycle rode past me and said, "Can I have a slice of your pie?" And I said,
"Where was
no, this was in Delaware." And and I said,
checking that accent.
I said no, and he said, "You Yankees sure are tight with your money." And so, because I wouldn't give him a slice of pizza at a NASCAR event as he rode by shirtless
in Delaware
and shoeless on a bicycle.
In Delaware.
I think he was part of the roving band of NASCAR fans who maybe go to multiple events, no matter where they are. So I'm not saying that like that's what all NASCAR fans are like. I'm saying that was my experience.
Are you giving Delaware to the South when the Blue Hens go to FBS next year? Are we getting Delaware? Is that what you're giving us?
No, I lived in Delaware for 8 years. If Delaware's in the South, I have to look at myself and figure out who I am as a person because I lived there for 8.5 years.
All right.
So Delaware's in the North. But
to the matter at hand, I don't know where that hat came from. We got to talk about that. That was
I wear the hat all the time.
No, but I mean, an instant pull just.
No, I get 10 emails a day from dogsonline.com now because I ordered a hat one time.
Oh,
so,
God.
be careful.
You seem to be able to generate running backs in the state of Georgia, which means that, again, and this is a big assumption to make, defensive quality in the front seven being what it maybe always will be in terms of that recruiting apparatus, that's a simpler formula to success. I always like paraphrase the old Woody Guthrie line when I talked about like, what was the secret of Nick Saban? What was the magic? And I think there's so much myth making. I don't want to use any profanity here, but there's so much myth making nonsense that goes on to Nick Saban. Nick Saban was an emotionless, less than human machine. But to paraphrase Woody Guthrie, it's like this machine kills uncertainty. And so if you want to kill uncertainty, you're Kirby Smart. That's why I watch Georgia quarterback play and I just kind of shrug because it's ultimately a facilitator's role. Whereas if you want to see something dynamic and amazing and interesting, man, I'm watching that Texas-Washington semi from last year over and over again, right? That's what you want it to be casually. Yeah. So if you believe that old sort of idea, then I guess Texas has more room for error, except that Sark has taken the defensive philosophy and just maximized it in the opposite direction, meaning that he has maybe two of the best quarterbacks in college football on the same roster, which is very much almost a nearly impossible thing to say in the portal era.
We were trying to work an offseason trade. Would you do, who says no, Arch Manning for Mason Graham? Given what Texas lost at defensive tackle, and certainly Michigan would miss Mason Graham, but they still have Kenneth Grant. They'd find somebody else, and you solve the quarterback issue. I think it'd be a great trade for both teams.
I'm trying to project Arch Manning in that offense in 1, 2, 3 seasons.
Yeah, I think they both become even bigger national title contenders and playoff contenders this year. If you're only thinking about this year, we'll trade our backup quarterback for maybe the best defensive tackle in the country. And Michigan says Arch Manning's probably one of the 10 best quarterbacks in the country, like right now. And we'll throw him in there and still have the rest of that defense. So
based on last week, I think the need is, and I'm not a person who wants to play with one piece of data. Like post week 1 is sometimes the dumbest time in our industry. Post. A lot
of competition for the dumbest time.
This is true. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Post week 1, maybe pre week 3. This is when we're creating suppositions with just the tiniest of data sets. But quarterback play being what it is or is not at Michigan, I feel like that's more of a Michigan need. So if I was Texas, I'd lean harder and see if I could trade out for more.
Okay. Well, we'll get the GMs on the phone and see if we can work something out. These are blue bloods, Mike. We can show the stat about most wins. I got this off Wikipedia, so I'm sure it's right. You're talking about, like, it's amazing to me how much the teams that were good 100 years ago are still the teams that are good now. Michigan, Alabama, Ohio State, Texas, Notre Dame, your top 5 win teams. Like, I almost feel bad for the programs that weren't good 100 years ago. It's like, I'm sorry. Like, we weren't. And I was going through, I was trying to make the list. Like, everybody in their first week game notes says, beginning our 134th year of college football, beginning our 123rd year of college football. It just blows your mind.
Sure.
How long this sport has been around. And that, again, Michigan and Texas are 2 of the top 5 teams here. But you touched on this with Texas. Let me ask if this is a generalization that maybe is more true than not. In modern history, has the issue been for Texas maybe caring too much as it relates to instability and instant change and firing guys and chaos? And has the issue been for Michigan maybe not caring enough? That in the modern college football world, when you want to be a fully holistic university and you care about football, but you also care about all the things that Michigan cares about, you and I certainly had the conversation on your show that maybe this whole Connor Stallions thing, one of the things it shows is that Michigan was like, we're going to try to win at football, whatever it takes. And that, in at least for Michigan fans, and we don't have to restart the YouTube comments unless people want to. That's it. No more comments about Connor Stallions. I'm just kidding. We'll be doing it for the next 10 years.
Yes.
They tried. They were doing everything it took, which if you're a Michigan fan would be like, maybe you would say, finally, yes, good. And Texas, if they let Sark settle a bit, I do think you look at Charlie Strong got 3 years. Tom Herman got 4. Rich Rodriguez got 3 years. Brady Hoke got 4. 2 7-year periods at those schools that didn't live up to the standard. One of my hypotheses might have been Texas fires guys quicker. Tom Herman got fired after 4 years, going 32-18. Brady Hoke got fired after 4 years, going 31-20. Maybe they're not so different.
There's a lot here. So circumstantially, both of those firings are informed by a pre-firing decision, which is a fancy way of saying they had a guy before they fired their guy. Okay.
That is a very fancy way of saying that.
All right.
So kind. Yes, please. Can we bring in Jim and Steve for the pre-firing decisions, please?
Correct.
Thank you.
There's a lot of things I could complain about what's left of the reporting ability at the national level in the media, where it spends its time.
You complain about it on Twitter every day.
Well, that's ESPN. That's a completely different beast. I was about to say, if you can't get behind me complaining about the Cowboys, what brand are you selling?
I like it. I do and you're right. He complains because the ESPN talks about the Cowboys every day, regardless of what is happening in the world of sports.
Oh, let me solicit your listeners. I'm going to do this. If you're in the audience, it's at 38 Godfrey on Twitter. I don't want to have to watch this every day. Mm-hmm. But when I go to the gym or when I am in a public space or a waiting room, First Take or one of these shows is on. If you see them talking about the Cowboys, you can take a picture and send it to me, because the thesis is that 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and I'm correct. No matter, I don't care if the Lakers or Celtics won the championship last night, if we are at war with a country where the Olympics might be going on, it doesn't matter. The Cowboys will be, and maybe the Jets will be, the most discussed item of that particular day. So
the best one was when, like, after the Colorado North Dakota State game, you had the thing. It was like, will Shedeur Sanders be the Cowboys' next quarterback? And it was like, they can't be stopped.
That was like 6 minutes. I was waiting for my wife's card to be serviced, oil change or whatever, and that was 6 minutes into the segment. That was restraint on their part. Okay,
that was restraint. Does Caitlin Clark like the Cowboys? We asked her.
Oh, please, Doug, you just spoke. That's like, man, your lips to God's ears on that one. Okay.
So Sark and
Sark
pre-firing decisions.
I said one of the things that I would love some investment being made is, I really want to know exactly when the decision makers at the 4 schools that kicked off this last round of realignment were convinced enough to start making actionable decisions. So that's USC, UCLA, and Red River. I want to know specifically, when did they get into, hey, we are creating this information. We are the ones deciding to move conferences. So we need to use this to our advantage. Texas is a great example because they were, I don't want to say 50-50 with Tom. I think that would be that would not be truthful, Tom had some support still in high places at Texas. They were not coming off of a disastrous season by any stretch. Recruiting had some positivity to it. I'm hedging a little, okay? The decision to bring in Sark came specifically because they knew they were going to the Southeastern Conference and they wanted to emulate the Alabama and Georgia personnel style as much as possible. They knew they wanted to save an assistant, and it's Texas. They knew they did not want to be defensive minded. So you sort of almost end up with Sark as a default. Yeah. Now, I don't need to tell you the story with Brady Hoke and Jim Harbaugh. It's very simple. They were smelling the chance to go after Jim Harbaugh, and that's it, and that's all. So if you look at those tenures and decide, are they trigger happy or not? I think you have to have that context that both of them saw what they believe to be sea change moments coming up. A little bit different for Michigan. They really wanted that native son. And by the way, ultimately it doesn't look, regardless of all the things
he was too, but Jim Harbaugh was nativer. Yeah.
Yeah. I understand that Brady Hoke was technically a Michigan man, but let's not kid ourselves.
I was at the news conference when they announced Brady Hoke, and that was after Rich Rod. That was all they played up, was that Brady Hoke was a Michigan man.
Sure.
But then you had the ultimate Michigan man who had been to a Super Bowl.
So but I would have been a Michigan man after Rich Rodriguez. The degree of which they needed some local to come in there after Rich was painful. But Jim was this savior. Honestly, Jim was the savior complex. And look, and regardless of all the things he said that weren't true, or all of the things that they build their identity on that turned out to be false because of the cheating, it worked. They did the thing, and they actually need to lean into that a little bit more, which is a conversation for another day. But Texas was not necessarily trigger happy. And to answer your original question, I don't know if it should be characterized so much as caring too much or caring not enough. I think it's the way you care. I think it's the decisions that you make.
Love language. What's your love language?
Well, I just think, look, if you were an influential party, or if you were part of some particular, cabal at any one of these major schools, your effect is probably more detrimental than it is positive at any given moment. And again, to go back to the Saban effect, or look, you would know this with Meyer as well. One of the sort of quiet parts of their genius that built their myth, they tamped all that down into something that was more manageable. And at Alabama and Ohio State, that's not an easy feat. There are a lot of voices in the room when you are trying to make decisions, or sometimes there's a lot of voices in the room when you don't solicit for those voices. They're just there. They're perennial in Tuscaloosa, I can tell you that. The genius of Saban was that he walked in on day one back in 2007 and said, all right, Birmingham, Huntsville, Mobile, wherever else. You guys hate you guys hate y'all, and this group's mad at this group, and these guys like Shula, but these guys wanted to, but it all stops now. This is the tip of the story's called Tip of the Spear. I've told it a bunch. He walked in and in a very short order said, I'm it. I'm the only decision maker here. You will be utilized when asked to provide resources for whatever it is that we ask you for. If there is anything that moves away from this, if there is any deviation in this plan, you will be excommunicated from, thou shalt be a Pharisee. Like, that's how it happened. Meyer, to his credit, did roughly the same thing. Although I don't know much. I don't know if I would have ID'd the booster corps as the main problem when he got to Columbus. I think his was much more personnel driven. If anything, he kind of had to stir them up in certain ways to get more to be less laconic. But in both cases, Texas and Michigan, for a long time, tails were wagging dogs because they would defend their ideology. It was almost like they were sort of trading dogma over fact in public. And I think that's a way that you could characterize the missteps of both Michigan and Texas the exact same way, despite them being very different culturally.
So last point about the coaches, then I do think again, there's so many of these blue bloods, all of them, that had a coach who established the identity of these football programs, right? From Bo Schembechler to Woody Hayes to Bear Bryant to Darrell Royal. We all know the names. And so I think it becomes difficult. Saban did it, but it becomes difficult to do that in the modern era. But what I do wonder about is when you have programs who are on tilt a little bit.
Okay.
And if you come in, maybe we'll call them settlers. Not that anyone settled for them, but that they settled stuff down and reestablished an identity and a way of doing business. And maybe they're not long-termers, but I think Urban Meyer in 7 years, I thought a dark cloud would be hanging over Ohio State. He came in, he reestablished things, he settled things down, he passed it off to Ryan Day. Jim Harbaugh, 9 years at Michigan. It's not Bo, but he, from where it was when he took over to what it was when he handed it over to Sharon Moore, completely changed the program. Could Sark be that at Texas? And maybe Sark doesn't have to be the coach for 25 years. And maybe they don't have to name a field for him or build a statue. But from an uncertain time in Texas history after Mac Brown and everything's topsy-turvy, and you come in for maybe a little shy of a decade, but you reestablish what you are. And then I think people are always worried about, can the next guy keep it going? If you have the right settler who shows you the way, maybe it's the new era. Right? What Harbaugh did at Michigan, is that what Sark could be for Texas?
Yes, and it still defies logic. It's sort of like in my brain to say that because of Sark's past and because of Sark's unpredictability, and but honestly, even scratching all the personal stuff aside, like his on-field was not that level of, he wasn't impeccable by any stretch, but I think what's working into Sark's favor is that he did study hard at the Saban Reform School. He did bring in some very, I thought he made some really smart assistant hires that had very little to do with scheme. Because the guy's arguably a top 5 play caller at the pro or college level. Okay. So he doesn't necessarily have to come in and cultivate a group of young. It's not like where Mark Stoops is sort of constantly renting off a Liam Cohen or something like that, out of the Rams tree. He didn't need that. But bringing in Bo Davis, look, if I could sell a T-shirt in Texas right now, it would be Bo Davis was right. And I don't know if you know exactly what I'm talking about, but there's this famous. I think you could still find it on YouTube. And it was after a loss to either Iowa State. I think it was Iowa State or Kansas when they were in the Big 12. And there was, I would say, a conversational level of commotion on the bus after the game. And Texas lost. They lost like 2 or 3 possessions. It was bad. And Bo Davis, who is very much famously a hammer for Nick Saban and a good recruiter, completely loses it. And it's not hard to find this rant online. And it's nothing like amazing or unique. But I keep hearing from Texas people how that was so shocking at the time because I don't like to use the word entitlement because the entitlement in college football doesn't work it doesn't work top down. It's a very strange sort of culture because of the way we've created our labor class. But Austin fostered entitlement amongst its boosters and down to its players. And it honestly, I had nothing against the guy. It started in the Mac Brown era when he would come in a very sort of governor kind of presidential sort of way and offer this 5-star the day after the previous class had signed, and you were just sort of expected to sign because it's Texas. And as you know, this was a time when personnel evaluation was maybe not at its strongest, and there was always this entitlement at Texas. And look, more than 1,000 current and former Oklahoma or Oklahoma State or A&M assistants will tell you it made for soft football teams. And while that changed under Strong and it changed under Herman and they changed scheme and they did recruit strong on the lines, both lines, there was always that sense of entitlement. And one of the things that Sark took great notes on, I guess, at the Saban Reform School was breaking down that culture. And he did it quickly. And they were very, very bad that first year. And everyone thought Sark was in and over his head. But I think what he had was the consent and the permission, the support of the booster corps that, hey, we know we're going to the SEC. Let's get this SEC guy who's fresh, grad student, fresh from the Saban college. We're going to listen to him implicitly for 2 years. Hopefully we see some results. Certainly helps you land a Manning. That's a big deal. Big deal, especially going into the SEC. And so they did a controlled burn, and it lasted about a year. Now, moving forward, everyone's a pioneer right now, Doug. Everybody. There is no blueprint to winning a national title in the NIL portal era. There's no blueprint.
True.
There's not. The teams that have won national titles are winning them on the heels of methodology established before this time. Michigan's title last year is not a case study on how to do it. Neither is Georgia, technically. Okay? Moving forward, someone is yet to author the Saban or Meyer or Schembechler, Hayes, Bryant level of how to win and how to dominate in this new era, specifically portal, NIL, what may come down to be actual player compensation, potentially a cap management issue, all these things that are either happening or on the horizon. Could Sark be that individual given Texas's resources and his ability to create offensive football that is appealing to both transfer portal and high school recruits? Yes, it is possible. And yes, it is still weird to say that.
Yeah. I mean, Ryan Day at Ohio State wants to be that author. Dan Lanning,
definitely.
Oregon wants to be that author. Like, there's a lot of guys who want to author that, and the coaches are very involved, right? With hands-on, trying to figure out the NIL component here. Very, very last thing on this: Steve Sarkisian versus Sharon Moore in this situation. We saw Sark, as you said, sort of like ease into this 5-7, 8-5 playoff team last year. Sharon Moore in year one. Did you think Sharon Moore was like the right guy for this? I completely understood the hire. I am often against like the interim. No, don't do that. It's just good vibes. Is he actually the best person for the job? Who knows what the NCAA may or may not do? But I thought, given what the culture was of that program, what Harbaugh had laid down, how important Sharon Moore was to it, I thought he was the right guy to keep it going. Do you think it was the right guy? And do you think this will keep going for Michigan?
I'm not saying this to cop out of the question, but I'm saying that there could not have been another hire. There's never been in the history of Michigan football a circumstance in which you have an interim head coach that beats Ohio State, that looks as dominant and as effective as he does, an offensive coordinator on the staff, someone who's wild, like I would say, as trusted as the head coach by the roster, by key people in Ann Arbor. They didn't have a choice. So whether or not he's correct, I don't know if I'm absolving. I don't know if I'm apologizing for Moore or absolving Michigan in this. I really don't. I just don't know if there's another. There really is no way to go out and hire someone else. Period.
Yeah.
Nor, by the way, given a lot of ugly truths about college football, nor should there have been, because had that happened, let's acknowledge the obvious here. Had they gone out and hired literally any other human being to be the head coach at Michigan, you would have created the most damning statement against a minority coach in the history of the sport. Because if you believe in meritocracy, as so many of these coaches and ADs do, what more could the man have done but beat Ohio State on that sideline with that team? I don't think he will get the grace period he deserves. And that is, I almost say that with a little bit of an asterisk, because we still don't know what the full fallout of the investigation is. So unfortunately, sometimes great opportunities are handcuffed by terrible circumstances.
It's another Godfrey words to live by. You're very inspiring.
I'm going to start selling throw pillows. Let's go. Let's do a side business. Well, yeah.
The South can cram it will be my throw pillow, but I'll send you one.
Let's workshop that. But like add something into that, like a Minnesota ope, like make it nicer before you deliver. You see what I'm saying? We're going to work on this.
Before you go, let me show you my sword. Hold on.
I don't know if that was a euphemism or not. Nope.
How about that? You got a sword on your show?
Where did it come from?
From the sword store. So I have two. If you ever come over, we can play swords together.
Hang on.
So,
hang on.
What do you got? I know what you have because I saw you use it.
What?
I know what it is. It's going to be, I don't want to give it away because we're building up the suspense here, especially for the people who are listening on podcast. Steven is leaning
it's in my truck.
I can't find it.
No, I think it's in
my
my
truck.
I'm sorry.
It's your Swiss Army knife. It's your Swiss
no,
Army
I have
knife.
it.
Right?
Yeah. Well, actually, it's a single bladed switch, which is not legal. But
Army knife. Not Swiss,
well, it's a switch. It's a switch knife, which is not legal, but I use it all the time. Mainly for Amazon packages before you cast some sort of redneck aspersion that I'm cleaning a trout in my office.
Look at this. If we're talking about not legal, you don't get much less legal than this baby right here.
Aren't you in Ohio right now? I'm pretty sure swords are legal in Ohio.
Let me check. I'll check the statutes. All right.
It's just cold Florida.
Now listen, we're not going to. That's why I need swords for guys like you. With your little Southern jokes. Stephen Godfrey, you can find him on Split Zone Duo, and you can read him in the Washington Post every week, right?
Wrote about Cam Ward this week. We wrote about a Miami quarterback of some note, which is weird to say.
Try to work in some Southern people. I mean, some Northern guys there. The North.
What do you want?
Too.
What do you want?
I don't know. Maybe,
they gave me Dion. I did Florida State week 0.
Drew Aller? Little James Franklin, little Andy Kotelnicki. Andy Kotelnicki is a big teddy bear. Do that.
Did he really? I heard about this blizzard thing in the post. I don't know if you're running out of time or not. Like, what a wonderful! Like, I thought that was hilarious. I thought it was great.
Yeah, vanilla with offenses like it's just.
But is a blizzard? But does one view a blizzard inherently as complicated? I look at it and said, "Oh, they put candy and ice cream." I don't necessarily think like, how did they capture the sun and stars? But all right,
listen,
he literally
I'm
pointing the
giving you
sword
free
at me.
content for the Washington Post. 1,200 words on the blizzard. People will eat it up, literally. So Godfrey is going to be with us every now and then. So we're excited to have him. And you can listen to him when he's not here on Split Zone Duo. And he's just so excited to be able to come here and bring some occasionally Southern perspective. But you're a man of the world.
I try.
Here on the North, right?
I didn't use my accent once. I used a very neutral accent. Okay. Very Washington, D.C. accent.
And I didn't use my sword. That's our agreement. No accents, no swords. He's Stephen Godfrey. Thanks again to our good buddy, Bill Landis, who does it with me every day here, Monday through Thursday. And thanks to our producer, Mike Yorostowski. We'll be back with game picks and previews for all the Northern games on Thursday. For now, I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.